he's giving you a world, even if he isn't giving you a plot. That was my take anyway.
This movie is so empty and so superficial, and there is just nothing to it. We're here to rebel against whatever you got. Talking about the Bikeriders, Alonso and I. This is out in theaters now. This is the latest from Jeff Nichols. It is star-studded, and we do not agree on this film. Alonso, tell us about it.
Oh my!
We gotta go.
Nah, we don't. They're scared of us.
Nichols was inspired by a 1968 book of photographs called The Bikeriders by Danny Lyon. And Danny Lyon is presented as a character here, played by Mike Faist from Challengers. And he's basically an outside observer who's hanging out with the Chicago Vandals, as they're called in the film, getting a feel for the life, what draws people into it, what's exciting, what are the thrills, where does the whole idea of these biker gangs come from, which were a somewhat new phenomenon in the United States. His most helpful interviewee is a woman named Kathy, played by Jodie Comer. She talks about sort of being drawn into this world kind of by accident and only sticking around because she fell for a guy named Benny, played by Austin Butler. And when you look at Austin Butler in this movie, you can see why she would maybe fall for him. The gang is run by Johnny, played by Tom Hardy, and clearly he is inspired by watching Marlon Brando in The Wild one night on TV and is aching for something more. And this is a film that really kind of draws you into a mood and a tone and a sense of place. And it wasn't until afterwards that I was like, we don't really know a lot about these characters. They don't really talk much about themselves, and the movie doesn't dig that much up. But at the same time, I was like, but it still worked for me. Like, I still felt like I had entered this world, even though I don't know why did they become bikers? Why are they, what specifically in their lives brought them to this moment? And I think a lot of that has to do with just how good Jodie Comer is and what a great narrator she is for the film, and what a great sort of raconteur about this life. And she's sort of looking at everything in this kind of like, I don't even believe this, but here's what happened, which I found really compelling. And so as much as afterwards I found myself maybe kind of wanting to pick at the threads of the narrative and what it wasn't giving me in terms of characters, I have to say, while I was watching it, I felt like I was getting a complete story. Like my biggest sort of like is that there's a character who winds up being very important to the plot, who Mike Faist's character never meets or talks to. And within the context that everything we're seeing in this movie is supposed to be through his eyes and through what he's been told by Kathy and what he's observed firsthand, that guy's got a backstory. And I'm like, well, how did you know it, Mike Faist?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the one thing where I could sort of point and say, hey, narrative issue here. But for the most part, I was so swept up in the craft of this film and how it's put together and the period stuff. And, it's Nichols working with the cinematographer he always works with, like his fourth time working with this editor, I think his fifth time having David Wingo do the score. Like, he's giving you a world, even if he isn't giving you a plot. That was my take anyway.
This movie is so empty and so superficial, and there is just nothing to it. And it feels like a book that came to life, but just like a glossy coffee table book without any kind of context or substance. I mean, yes, they do invoke this era through costume design, production design, the needle drops, just the attitude of it all. But there is nothing to any of these people. Tom Hardy's character, for example, Johnny, supposedly is the only one who has a job of all of them, which we don't see anything about or know anything about. They have a throwaway line. He's got a 9-to-5 as a trucker. And like, that's all we know about him. And all of them just feel like these really empty, attractive types to such an extent that I never got caught up in the sense that they were truly in danger, or either they were putting their lives on the line for this passionate life that they're exploring. Like, there was just nothing to it in terms of tension. It's just one moment after another of, okay, now we're going to ride to this place. Okay, now we're going to get in this bar fight. Okay, now this person's going to show up and try to challenge Johnny. And it just feels like one little episode after another. And yes, there's some back and forth with the Jodie Comer character to provide some context, but I found her to be so grating. And maybe this is what this woman actually sounds like, because you see Mike Faist with, a microphone, these audio recordings must exist someplace, you know, beyond just him transcribing them for the purpose of the book. Maybe she had that kind of like over the top caricature of a nasal Midwestern accent, but I found it kind of annoying. You know, the whole thing sounds like this. And it's hard to compare something to a film that is as iconic as Goodfellas. But I'm getting a lot of Karen Hill and Goodfellas, like leading us into this dangerous, treacherous world of men who live by their own code and are loyal only to each other, you know? And so, and
that was a big influence, actually. I just after writing my review, I read an interview this morning with Nichols where he did talk about Goodfellas and the idea of like, how do you bring people into a world without necessarily having like a story to hang your hat on, but just sort of the assemblage of characters and of incident, you know?
Right. It's so clear and similar to Kathy at first being kind of appalled. She is soon fascinated and swept up and ensconced in this dangerous life. I just didn't care about anybody in this movie, you know, and like they look great, but I never saw the romanticism of it that Jeff Nichols is trying to make us feel. Yeah, I never felt swept up in it like, God, that was like a life that I really, really want for myself.
Well, I mean, like, yeah, it all seems kind of seedy and like not my thing, but I think that what the movie does is they sort of show you what came after that sort of retroactively makes their version look sort of sweet, you know, because later you get like the hard drugs and the basically like they become kind of a crime cartel, whereas these guys are just sort of like looking to blow off steam or whatever. These are characters who exist in the moment and whose life is all about the moment, and they aren't interested in their past. And so it's hard to sort of like work in a way in which they would talk about their past. And I can't challenge anything you're saying. Like I hear what you're saying, and I can hear that was your experience watching it, and these are the flaws that the movie has in terms of its structure. All I know is that whatever the movie was doing, whatever alchemy it was creating with, it's so really well cast. Like this is the kind of movie that demands like people who can act and give you like a lot with very little screen time and very little dialogue. And hats off to Francine Maisler for bringing in people like Emery Cohen and Boyd Holbrook and of course Michael Shannon, because it's a Jeff Nichols movie. That I don't know, I just felt like even though nobody was spelling this world out to me or defining it in a specific way, that I was picking it up through the way that the story was being told. And so it's almost like it's a, you know, this is okay. Do not say I'm comparing these two movies, but if you look at like Bresson's O Hazard Balthazar, you know, where you are following this donkey through its Christ-like existence, like the movie never stops and tells you things. You just have to kind of like pick up from where we are and what's happening and how some people behave. And ultimately, by the end of it, you feel like you have gotten this full story. And so, yeah, this movie is not going to give you the anthropological, well, it was after World War II and men were seeking adventure and, you know, breaking conformity. Like they don't do that. And that's an approach. But I think the approach that Nichols takes just feels enveloping enough that I was willing to go with it, even though it wasn't giving me a lot of the things I would traditionally expect from a narrative.
But when Norman Reedus shows up, there's like a glimmer of the movie this could have been, because he is dangerous and exciting and weird, and there's like a texture to his character even in just the brief screen time that he has. He shows up at one of their picnics, you know, where they all hang out and they get drunk and they fight each other and they cook out all night. But if they had Lodge cooking products like the ones that are on sale right now to make their campfire delicious treats, they might have been, I don't know, more satisfied in their lives, perhaps.
It couldn't hurt.
Lodge has a sale going on right now. Take up to 20% off of all of their camp Dutch ovens. So like if you're cooking stew or whatever over a campfire, and all the outdoor accessories that you need to go with it, 20% off on those things as well. Just use the link down below in our description and you can enjoy to your heart's content. If you're out on the open road with the wind in your hair and bugs in your teeth.
It's summertime. When if not now?
Go camping with Lodge, all kinds of good stuff. And that runs through to July 1st. You've got a little bit of time on that still. So Norman Reedus shows up. Again, it's a great example of the good casting you're talking about.
Mhm.
There are faces and characters here that are, quirky and odd and, amusing here or there, scary here or there, but it all felt really insubstantial to me. And can we talk about Tom Hardy and the voice he is doing? I know he's doing Brando. I know he's doing the version of Brando that he sees on TV.
Yeah.
And it's just so annoying and so distracting and so mannered. And it is a huge obstacle to him feeling like a real character of his own.
I have kind of come to expect that Tom Hardy is going to do some crazy voice every time I see him, whether it's that movie about the bootleggers where he wears the great sweaters and everything seems to be like he's talking within his sinus canal, or Bane, or Dunkirk where he's got his mouth covered up. It's so rare that you get a chatty Tom Hardy in a voice that is declarative. So I don't even just rolls off my back at this point. Like if Tom Hardy shows up and enunciates, I'm like, ooh, what's the occasion? So yeah, it didn't take me out of it.
But it's like a parody. It's like a caricature, and we're meant to fear this guy as the leader of this group who has like this stranglehold on this group, and everyone follows him.
Well, he still radiates gravitas, and
he does drink to that. He looks good in the jacket. All right, what is your number?
I said a 7.8. I mean, I think this movie is maybe more of an art film than it even thinks it is, or maybe that's just me being super generous. And I'm real mixed on Jeff Nichols. I remember we had an argument where I was on the other end of it about when Midnight Special came out. Like that movie did not work for me in a lot of ways, but this one does. So yeah, 7.8.
I'm going to say a 4.8, and that is just for craft. That's for craft and costume design, and as you mentioned, the cinematography. So the Bikeriders, what do you think? Let us know.